The Punchbowl at 7 Stonegate in York is just one of the many York pubs that boast one or more ghost stories. Somewhat confusing having two pubs named the Punchbowl in York. The other is owned by Wetherspoons and is just outside the towers of Micklegate Bar on the corner of Blossom Street and Nunnery Lane. A punchbowl is mentioned on Stonegate, York at the Siege of York during the First Civil War in 1644, but there is no proof that it stood on the site of the present building. The name Punchbowl denotes a historical connection with the Whig Party, for from the 17th century punch was the preferred drink of the Whigs, whilst the Tories preferred claret. It is said, therefore, that any pub displaying a punchbowl sign was declaring its political allegiance at the time. Parts of the present Punchbowl are from an original coffee house dating to 1675, and was indeed associated with the city's Whigs. But these older parts can't be easily viewed. The rear wing largely survives from the original building, as do 3 ground floor fireplaces. In 1761 it was licensed as a pub, and became the headquarters of the York Races Committee. It was also popular with the bell ringers at York Minster, and a bell clapper from the Minster has been used as a support in the rear bar since 1765. This building on Stonegate was largely rebuilt over the years, and then burned down in 1930. It was rebuilt in a brewer's Tudor style, designed by Biscombe and Ferry for the Tadcaster Tower Brewery, with red herringbone brick at the front of the ground floor and plasterwork above. It looks much older than it actually is. The first story I have from here is told of a former landlord who was killed in a fire. For clarity, the pub has suffered 2 major fires in its history. It is said that his spirit still walks down the cellar steps, despite them having long since been removed. He continues down the steps until he disappears into the floor. The second account is of a grey lady who is reputed to have been a woman who committed suicide after her lover cheated on her. She is said, as in all these types of stories, to have come back looking for her unfaithful man. The third apparition is another young woman who is believed to have been responsible for ghostly footsteps and a disincarnated voice, both of which have often been heard by the staff and customers alike. However, there are 2 stories offered as to who she is. The first is that she was strangled to death by a drunk in the 18th century after she rejected his advances. At the time, the pub is said to have been a brothel, although there is no proof of this. The apparition is said to run from room to room trying to evade her pursuer. The other version of the tale is that she was a woman beaten to death in the 16th century who runs around the building, again trying to evade her murderer. One visitor to the pub stayed there with a friend quite a few years ago, when the place offered accommodation. His friend swore blind that he was woken up several times in the night by what he described as a presence next to his bed. He was really quite distressed and white as a sheet in the morning. Now, I have a couple of interesting personal experiences from the Punchbowl dating to the period when I was an undergrad at York. My first recollection was having passed through the main door and into the corridor, where I heard my name called out quite clearly by a young female voice from the tap room when we were just approaching its door. The room was relatively empty, and there was nobody in there that I knew or who knew me. Nobody else in the group heard my name being called either. Later that same evening, I saw a shadow flit past the door to the room, the same door that we had entered through earlier, but when I jumped up to check, there was nobody in the hallway. Shadows, it seems, were a common sighting in this pub. This particular experience happened to me again on a subsequent visit. A friend of mine worked as a member of bar staff in the pub while studying for his BA at York a few years after I was there. His girlfriend did as well, and she had an incident where her doppelganger was seen entering the pub and walk down the corridor. This experience repeated for the witnesses when she physically entered the pub herself a few moments later. On another occasion, my friend had been working in the cellars taking delivery of new barrels of beer. Once they had finished, they closed the hatch doors and were astonished when the doors were hit forcibly from beneath. There was nothing to account for this when checked. Odd things were often reported from the cellars, with objects moving around at times, although again, there was never anyone there to account for this.